repository for thousands and thousands of stories, and that makes my perspective really unique. But I never had the first time that I went to a WPATH meeting after Aydin and I were together, I remember feeling very different than when I had gone prior to us being together. And I remember feeling a personal connection in response to the massive amount of othering that was happening. And it was really interesting because Aydin Key had actually done a shout-out from WPATH in Bangkok and said, I am feeling horribly othered. And I remember seeing that and thinking, oh, my God, this is the first time that I have experienced this from a different perspective. And that was so helpful. It just my compassion and my understanding is so much deeper because of having Aydin in my life. I mean, in addition to the just joy of my life being escalated beyond all reason, but it really helped me in this work to be able to say, I see how gender dysphoria waxes and wanes. I see it in my own personal life, and I can see where this is happening for this young person and try to help families understand it.
And how much we don't say to one another, how much we don't say to even one person sometimes, those moments. We don't share it with anybody. And one of the young people I was talking to yesterday said, I used to bind 2. I'd put on 3 jog bras.
Yeah.
And hurt my. I said, did you ever tell anybody about this? They said no. And I was the first person they shared it with.
Yeah.
And the self-harm that was done, that this young person brought on themselves because of gender and LGBT, all the LGBT together, dysphoria, if you will, dysphoria.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so much. When kids are bullied in school, 60% of the time they don't tell an adult.
Yeah.
And you think about 80% of the time we probably don't say anything to anybody, even as an adult, because we don't want to burden people and we don't want to feel the feelings all the time.
Well, and something that I learned
Aydin's really good at that. Aydin Key was really good at that, of holding that space, of saying, where are all the trans people in the room? Yeah. Jameson Green, was he even there? I mean...
Yeah. I think that one of the most valuable, very valuable things that I learned from my Aydin, is this idea of just getting used to things that no human should have to get used to. Sort of acclimating to sort of ongoing aggression around gender. And that was something that I hadn't really thought about, but we always, and he taught me this too, right? That's really great that trans youth and trans folks are super resilient, but how messed up is that we have to be resilient? The reality is we've had to become resilient because of all the shit that gets piled on us. Mm-hmm. And that's really true, right? And a lot of times it's interesting because we're in a space where I think we're moving towards celebrating trans experience and trans lives, which is phenomenal. And I think there's sort of this denial of dysphoria that happens. Sometimes, young people will say to me, no, I don't have gender dysphoria. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe you're not, actively self-harming, or maybe you haven't been hospitalized because of, suicidality or something. But let's talk about the fact that you just spent 10 minutes telling me how you are in the locker room, every time white-knuckling it, hoping someone's not going to see your binder. That's gender dysphoria. That's something that you need to pay attention to that other kids don't. That's something that's different. And so there really is, even for these little tiny kids that are supported in the social transition in pre-pubertal childhood, who then go on to get blockers, and then go on to get prostate hormones early, they have different kinds of challenges.
Still stealth.
And there are the challenges of at some point all trans youth are going to say, "Oh my God, I'm trans," and whether that comes in the initial coming out process in adolescence, or if it's you socially transition in childhood and now your gender barometer is developed enough for you to say, "Oh, I'm a girl, but I'm a different kind of a girl," and everything that implies, all of the implications of that from a societal perspective, that conversation is going to happen. And we have to understand what that looks like as professionals, how we can do our very best to create safe and thriving and flourishing environments for all of these young people.
So let me ask you both this: if you were to do any research study to further, the thriving of trans folk as they age, what would you like to see done for those researchers out there who are dying to do some fresh research?
That's a great question. I sometimes feel like the angle is to get to, that it's not necessarily research, that the first piece has to come from, educating and changing the environment, right? I mean, first, it's like the pyramid of needs. I mean, first and foremost, trans folks have to stop feeling preoccupied with staying alive. That's something that if that's taking up 95% of your brain, you're actually not going to be successful at thriving. And so there's that piece that is the very, very basic core place of, wow, we're really not at a place even yet where I was thinking about this morning, Christian, because we had this horrific traumatic event happen in Florida overnight.
Right.
And I was thinking to myself, what I feel on behalf of my own family member, on behalf of all of the families that I know, and on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of LGBTQI people in the country, and how scary and it just you walk out your door and it's scary, and that's the first thing that has to change. Your life is not. We have to get to a place where your life and health and well-being and physical safety is not threatened because you are in this community, part of this community, and that we're not there yet. And that was a horrible reminder of that this morning, that we're not there yet. And understanding research around why people are discriminatory and hateful and violent, and I don't know that I would care to participate in that kind of thing, but I do know it's very useful to understand the environments that are occurring around trans kids who do flourish. What does it look like? What does their environment look like? How is the approaches to those young people that are really successful look different from the environments of the young people who are not as flourishing, who are struggling? And what of that, again, going back to this external versus internal drivers of distress, dysphoria, what are the things that we as a society can do, and then what are things where we can help people around the internal piece? Because for the first time, and I really appreciate this about Christina Olson's work, for the first time we have published in hard literature that supported trans kids are doing well. And that's so important, because up until now there has been an assumption that that there is inherent damage that's going to happen if people are socially transitioned in childhood. And there's really never been any evidence to support that incorrect assumption. And it's also based, like, it's undergirded by this idea that the worst possible thing that could happen is that you socially transition a cisgender kid, right? And that and the premise there is that in some way, in somebody's world, you can make a cis kid trans. Well, we've been trying for decades to make trans kids cisgender, and that's been profoundly ineffective, right? And so why does it make any more sense that we could possibly make a cisgender kid trans? That doesn't make any sense. And so we really need to be better about our understanding of development of kids who are socially transitioned and kids who are not. And that would be very, very valuable.
Right. And if anything, kids feel forced into the binary that they have to be this or that. And I think that's where about the only time they might socially transition from female to male and then back to gender queer, gender fluid, non-binary, agender, right? They're still they're still not cisgender. They're just not binary.
Right.
I think that's all I've seen. They're like, well, I tried this and I tried that, and I realized I'm just kind of gender queer and gender fluid. And I hear that from 50-year-old adults, just the same.
And I think we have to acknowledge, though, that we don't have space for that for assigned males.
Right.
And that's another thing that we rarely. We've touched on it a little bit in this conversation, but this is another problem with the work, with the science and the medicine, which is this assumption that all trans needs are the same. But that's not true, because we still live in a very misogynistic society, right? And so, what we trans-masculine, trans-feminine experiences, even for non-binary identified people, are very, very different.
Oh, yeah.
I don't see it acknowledged. It's not acknowledged.
Well, and depending on what culture you come from.
Yeah.
You know, all around the world, not just American.
That's right. Exactly.
Not just Americans, and not just, Americans who were born in America. Given that so many Americans were not born in America.
Right.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful all this time that we've had this personal relationship. Because when I watch you out there, I'm like, these are my people, and knowing that when people reach out, you're part of the SWAT team. You're part of my SWAT team. And knowing people all around the country has become so important to the work that I've done. Just, somebody from Hemet, California reached out, and from Riverside said, can you help us? Well, let's reach out to our people out there at the gender spectrum and, trans youth family allies, and to the work that you're doing, and, gender diversity with Aydin Cait, and with, NTLR with Asahor, and, and you, Aydin, it's knowing the people out there and not just seeing them as a name or a face on TV, I think is so important to continuing to build that network, so that when these adults and youth reach out, they have at least one person to talk to somewhere. Aydin, what are your final thoughts? Because I'll keep you all day.
Yeah. I appreciate the question. I mean, there's been so much said that it's hard to sort of put it together and final thoughts. I think that, I guess I appreciate the fact that some of the work that you're doing with access to education and thinking more around focusing on there's a litany of research that talks about suicide and self-harm and struggling kids, and that's what parents attach to. Well, if my kid is trans, then they're going to be these things, and there's not enough focus on the potential for your kids to be much more than those statistics, that it really lies on the shoulders of parents to make some decisions about preventing their kids from being those statistics. So I think that as a white trans guy, understanding that I'm in spaces that trans women of color or trans women are just not going to be in, and I have to have my own understanding and accountability for that, and that appreciating the partnership between our cisgender allies and providers